qualifying only championship. The 2025 Formula One season has just concluded, and one of the biggest complaints from both drivers and fans alike is that it's become too much of a qualifying formula. The cars themselves have become too fat.
You're too fat for your armour.
Fat? Fat, is it? Is that how you speak to your king?
And as this regulation cycle has worn on, the more dirty air they're producing, meaning that overtaking has become near impossible. Just look at Qatar, for example, towards the end of the season. But just how true is this hypothesis? Well, I've rerun the results of the entirety of the 2025 season using just the qualifying results instead of the race results. So what we're going to do in this video is look at that championship, compare it to what happened in real life, and see just how different it is. Does Lando Norris still come out victorious, or do we get a different champion? Well, come along with me and find out as we enter the 2025 qualifying only championship. Our season kicks off down under, where Lando Norris takes home the race win as he did in real life. However, behind him, there are some massive changes for the championship. In a tricky wet race in Australia, there were many drivers that crashed out or made mistakes, and there was a crucial strategy call at the end of the race that shook up the order. So without all that, Piastri benefits massively here. Having gone off in the race and finished 9th in the end, here he manages a P2 finish, and we've got Max Verstappen rounding out the podium in P3, down from P2 in the real race. And alongside Piastri, the other big gainer here is Yuki Tsunoda. Due to the fact that VCARB got the strategy call wrong at the end of the race, he was down in P12. However, here, he qualified P5, so that's a massive extra 10 points for him in the championship. Kimi Antonelli's beautiful debut performance bringing him up from P16 into P4 means nothing here, and Stroll and Hülkenberg miss out on their opening day points as well. The Drivers' Championship after that opening race just looks like that race's results, of course, and in the Constructors' Championship, McLaren take the early lead, having got maximum points here. The Chinese Grand Prix comes next on the calendar, and with it comes our first sprint race of the season. Won here by Lewis Hamilton as it was in real life, but here we've got Verstappen second and Piastri third instead of the other way around in real life. However, the rest of the point scorers remain the same, just in slightly different orders, so the qualifying result and the race result was quite similar. And similarly in the main race, the winner is the same. Oscar Piastri takes his first race win of the season, but Russell and Norris in real life were swapped round, and here Russell gets P2 and Norris gets P3. But the big changes here come below the podium. Ferrari don't get a double disqualification here, and so get a lovely P5 and P6 finish instead of 0 points at all. Isaac Hadjar's result is far better because RB don't mess up his strategy, and so he's getting his first points of the season, and the other one is Haas. In the real race, they got a heroic P5 and P8 finish from Esteban Ocon and Oliver Bearman. However, their qualifying performance was nowhere to be seen, and so they get no points here instead of what would have been 14 points. This means that Oscar Piastri takes the lead of the Drivers' Championship. George Russell is up into P3. Both Ferraris gain positions, and we've got Kimi Antonelli and Isaac Hadjar both up into the top 10. And in the Constructors' Championship, with Ferrari not getting that disqualification, they move up into P2 ahead of Mercedes, Red Bull and VCARB. And obviously after the Chinese Grand Prix, we all know what happens. It's time to subscribe to the channel, and here's why. Massive videos to end the season, all of your favourites from this year, but 2025 editions. Also, trying to hit 10,000 subscribers by the end of the year, so any help would be massively appreciated. Also, 95% of you guys are not currently subscribed to the channel, so I would appreciate it if you would. And lastly, this guy said that I should ask people to subscribe more, so here I am. But of course, what I was actually alluding to is the fact that Yuki Tsunoda and Liam Lawson swap after this race. Liam Lawson getting the promotion to VCARB. Let's see how he gets on. And Yuki Tsunoda, unfortunately, in that Red Bull car for the remainder of the season. We head to the Japanese Grand Prix next, where we have our first example of a race looking pretty much exactly the same as the qualifying result. In fact, the only change in the entirety of the top 10 is that Hamilton and Hadjar are swapped around. So of course this means that Max Verstappen takes home his first win of the season, with Norris in P2 and Piastri in P3. Charles Leclerc is ahead of the two Mercedes cars in P4, and Oliver Bearman gets Haas's first points of the season. In the Drivers' Championship, Verstappen reclaims P3, Charles Leclerc gets past teammate Lewis Hamilton, and Kimi Antonelli is up into P7. And in the Constructors' Championship, the battle for P2 rages on. Red Bull ahead currently, but only 2 points split them down to P4. At the Bahrain Grand Prix, the top two remain the same as they did in real life. However, Charles Leclerc picks up Ferrari's first podium of the season in P3. With Lando Norris qualifying down in P6, he obviously recovered to P3 in the race, but that doesn't matter here. Pierre Gasly gets a lovely P4 finish here for Alpine, having finished P7 in real life. Kimi Antonelli gets a P5 finish here, but he was all the way down in 11th in real life. And Carlos Sainz picks up points. However, in real life, he was blah, blah, blah. And again, like the Chinese Grand Prix, Haas have a double points finish taken away from them here, kind of emphasizing that early in the season anyway, their race performance was much better than their qualifying performance. Piastri's got a 20-point lead out front at this stage, with Pierre Gasly's massive P4 finish flying him up into P8 in the championship. The bottom half of the championship sees 7 drivers yet to score a point this season, with Jack Doohan gaining 3 positions thanks to having qualified P11 here. And in the Constructors' Championship, Mercedes and Ferrari move past Red Bull. We head to the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix next, where Verstappen and Piastri's first corner altercation is wiped off the board, with Verstappen not getting the 10-second penalty and not dropping behind Oscar Piastri because it's just the qualifying result. He gets his second win of the season here, with the Australian finishing second. Charles Leclerc's gained podium from last time out is lost here. He was on the podium in real life in P3, however here he's down to P4, and George Russell, who finished P5 in the real race, is up onto the podium instead of him. The big story here though has to be that Lando Norris crashed in the final part of qualifying, meaning that he was down in P10, only picking up 1 point here, whereas in real life he managed to recover to P4. And elsewhere, Sainz grabs a couple of extra points, and Gasly and Tsunoda don't crash on the opening lap, and thus are able to finish with some points as well. This P10 finish causes Lando Norris to drop to P4 in the Drivers' Championship. Antonelli gets past Lewis Hamilton, Yuki Tsunoda gets past Pierre Gasly, and Carlos Sainz enters the top half of the standings. In the bottom half of the standings, this stuff happens, and in the Constructors' Championship, Red Bull get past Ferrari based on number of wins this season, and Williams are just 1 point behind VCARB. The Miami Grand Prix brings us our second sprint race of the season, where rookie Kimi Antonelli has no chance to bottle it off the line as he did in real life, and so picks up the sprint race win. Piastri also manages P2 here with Norris in P3, whereas they were the other way around in the real race. Other changes further down are that Max Verstappen finishes P4 here, having not blocked Kimi Antonelli in the pit lane, and Charles Leclerc doesn't bin it on the way to the grid, and so gets P6. And in the main race, Max Verstappen takes home the top spot, win number 3 of the season for him, versus having finished P4 in real life, and Piastri, who finishes P4 here, won the race in real life. Lando Norris maintains P2, and Kimi Antonelli here picks up his first podium of his rookie season. Russell gets P5 here instead of the podium that he got in real life. Carlos Sainz is P6 instead of P9, and Esteban Ocon is in the points instead of Lewis Hamilton. In the Drivers' Championship, Max Verstappen is now just 6 points off of Oscar Piastri as Lando Norris retakes P3. The Williams boys have made some big gains here, and in the bottom half we can see that Esteban Ocon's first points finish of the season takes him ahead of teammate Oliver Bearman. At this point in the season, in the real championship, only 4 drivers were yet to score at this stage. However, here in the qualifying championship, we've still got 6 drivers yet to score. And of course, after the Miami Grand Prix is the time that Alpine make the brutal decision to drop Jack Doohan after just 6 rounds in the season. And in the Constructors' Championship, we can see that Williams have overtaken VCARB. At the Emilia-Romagna Grand Prix, I have no idea if I'm saying that right, but I love pronouncing it like that. Oscar Piastri picks up the win from Max Verstappen in P2, as the Dutchman isn't able to make his unreal move around the outside of turn 1, and so Piastri manages to maintain the win. Lando Norris was P2 in real life but has to settle for P4 here, and George Russell gets a podium here, having finished down in P7 in real life. The big gainers here are Aston Martin. 14 points in the qualifying championship versus in real life they only got 0. And the big losers here are Ferrari, 20 points in the real race and 0 here. In the Drivers' Championship, Piastri's gap out front is 13 points, as Alex Albon makes some gains, and in the bottom half we can see that both Aston Martins have moved up positions. Also, Franco Colapinto is here, he just doesn't fit on the graphic, and he hasn't had a qualifying position above what Jack Doohan has managed. He'll get on there eventually, don't worry guys. And in the Constructors' Championship, Aston Martin jump ahead of Haas, as the Saubers are the only team yet to score. The Monaco Grand Prix comes next, and predictably, it's got a very similar result to the real race. If there was any race this season that was going to have a similar result, it is this one, with the same podium here as we had in real life. The only big change in the points is the fact that Fernando Alonso does not DNF here, and so gets a lovely 8 points for Aston Martin. Isaac Hadjar enters the top half of the standings, and in the bottom half we can see that Alonso, Lawson and Esteban Ocon have all gained places. And in the Constructors' Championship, Red Bull makes some gains on Mercedes, and we can see that Aston Martin have gotten past Alpine. The Spanish Grand Prix brings us the exact same McLaren 1-2 as we had in real life. However, behind that, we've got some huge changes. Most notably, Max Verstappen takes home P3 because with no race in Spain, there's no chance for his moment of madness where he hit George Russell. We've also got Nico Hülkenberg losing out on a P5 finish that he had at the Spanish Grand Prix, having qualified all the way down in P16, and Kimi Antonelli doesn't DNF from this race and grabs P6. The other big one is obviously with Verstappen reinstated on the podium, Charles Leclerc misses out on his P3. In the Drivers' Championship, Oscar Piastri has over a race wins advantage over Max Verstappen at the sharp end. And in the bottom half, we can see that Gasly has gotten past Alonso and Tsunoda. And in the Constructors' Championship, everything remains the same. At the Canadian Grand Prix, we once again, as last race, have the exact same 1-2 as we had in real life, with George Russell taking home his first win of the season and Max Verstappen picking up P2. However, the P3 spot on the podium is taken by Oscar Piastri instead of Kimi Antonelli, as they are swapped round in positions here. Behind them, Hamilton and Alonso both gain a position each versus the real race, and Lando Norris takes a P7 finish, having not crashed into his teammates on this occasion. And finally, we have Franco Colapinto in P10, 1 point for him, scoring for that Alpine team in the second seat, a feat that wasn't managed across the entirety of the 2025 season. In the Drivers' Championship, things remain largely the same on the first page. However, Fernando Alonso has gained some big places. And on page 2, Colapinto's solitary point brings him up into P18. And in the Constructors' Championship, everything remains the same. Next up, we've got the Austrian Grand Prix, another where we've got a very similar result to real life. In fact, the top 6 places are all exactly as they were. So we've got Lando Norris in P1 picking up his 3rd race win of the season. Charles Leclerc picks up his 3rd podium of the season, all of which have been in P2. And Oscar Piastri rounds us out in P3. That man has only finished off the podium once so far this season, and that was in Miami where he was 4th. Behind the top 6, Kimi Antonelli is unable to torpedo Max Verstappen out of the race on the first lap, so they both get points, and Gabriel Bortoleto gets Sauber's first top 10 finish of the season. The Drivers' Championship after that round once again stays pretty much the same. However, Lando Norris has made some big gains on Max Verstappen here, and Lewis Hamilton has caught up somewhat to Kimi Antonelli. And in the bottom half, Liam Lawson and Gabriel Bortoleto both gain positions, and Nico Hülkenberg still hasn't out-qualified Jack Doohan this season, so he's remaining off this graphic until he does. And in the Constructors' Championship, Ferrari are getting closer to Red Bull. The British Grand Prix brings us up to the halfway point in the season, And this race has some massive changes versus real life. Max Verstappen picks up win number 4 of the season, having finished all the way down in P5 in the real race. Piastri maintains P2 and Norris is P3. Norris finished P1 in the race. Obviously Piastri had that penalty early on, so they swapped positions and Piastri asked for them to be swapped back, but papaya rules weren't really a thing there. I don't really know. But the most heartbreaking story here is our pointless man, Nico Hülkenberg, still has no points. Having finished on the podium in real life, his qualifying was so bad in Great Britain that he still hasn't managed to get any points this season. In the Drivers' Championship, Lewis Hamilton moves back past Kimi Antonelli, Fernando Alonso moves ahead of Alex Albon, and in the bottom half we can see that Gasly has gotten ahead of Isaac Hadjar. And in the Constructors' Championship, again, everything remains the same. So at the halfway point, here's how things compare to real life. We've got Verstappen over Norris in the qualifying championship. And we've also got Sainz and Alonso into the top half instead of Nico Hülkenberg and Esteban Ocon, with Alex Albon down 2 places. Sprint race number 3 of the season takes place at the Belgian Grand Prix, where the only big change in the sprint result is that Piastri manages P1 instead of Verstappen in real life. And in the main race, we continue in a similar vein. Norris grabs the win here instead of P2 in real life, but the rest of the top 10 remains mainly the same. The only big change is Yuki Tsunoda is up to P7 here instead of P13 in real life. And the other one is Isaac Hadjar in P8 here, whereas in real life he was P20 due to a technical issue. In the Drivers' Championship, we can see that both Williams drivers have climbed ahead of Fernando Alonso in the top half, and in the bottom half, both Isaac Hadjar and Gabriel Bortoleto gain positions. And in the Constructors' Championship, once again it does remain the same. However, Red Bull are now just 5 points off of Mercedes. At the Hungarian Grand Prix, a truly magical moment for the Tifosi takes place. Charles Leclerc grabs Ferrari's first win of the season, a feat they didn't manage across the entirety of the 2025 season because that car was a tractor. And even in the Hungarian Grand Prix in real life, Charles Leclerc didn't even manage to podium in that race because of his intense lift and coast session that he had to go through. So it's nice to see that Ferrari managed to get on top here at least. Piastri is P2 here as he was in real life. Lando Norris rounds out our podium in P3, having finished P1 in real life, and George Russell, who was P3, is P4 here. All this means that Oscar Piastri currently has a 42-point advantage over teammate Lando Norris, who is now P2, having gotten pack past Verstappen. And further down, Fernando Alonso has gotten back past the 2 Williams drivers, and in the bottom half, his teammate Lance Stroll is up 2 positions as well. And in the Constructors' Championship, Charles Leclerc's big win here takes Ferrari ahead of Red Bull. At the Dutch Grand Prix, Oscar Piastri takes home the win as he did in real life and gets win number 5 on the season. However, the big change here is that Lando Norris manages P2. No mechanical faults means that he still manages to maintain the position that he lost on that day. Verstappen, Hadjar and Russell all maintain position on where they were in real life. However, Ferrari gain massively in the qualifying championship, 6th and 7th here versus a double DNF in the real race. Isaac Hadjar's big P4 finish here at the Dutch Grand Prix moves him onto the first page of the standings. However, in the top half and in the bottom half of the Drivers' Championship, most things remain the same. And in the Constructors' Championship, there's just 8 points in it in the battle for P2 as VCarb get past Williams. We head to Monza next for the Italian Grand Prix, where in this race, we have the exact same top 4 as we had in real life. And this time, Oscar Piastri doesn't even need to give the position to Norris. Lewis Hamilton and George Russell swap positions on where they were in real life, and Alex Albon loses out big time. P7 in real life, 0 points here. This all sees Norris and Verstappen level on points in the Drivers' Championship at this stage, with Verstappen ahead based on countback. And on page 2, Gabriel Bortoleto gets past Lance Stroll, and Nico Hülkenberg still isn't on the board. And in the Constructors' Championship, there's now just 4 points in it for P2 as Red Bull make gains and Mercedes fall back. And further down, Sauber have gotten past Haas. At the Baku City Street Circuit, Max Verstappen takes home back-to-back race wins as he did in real life, and it's his 6th win of the campaign. But he's ahead of quite an unlikely podium duo. Carlos Sainz coming home in P2, he was P3 in the real race, and Liam Lawson gets a podium for VCarb, having finished P5 in the real race. The other two changes worth mentioning here are George Russell down in P5 instead of the P2 that he managed in the real race, and Oscar Piastri doesn't bin it in the wall on lap 1, and so gets 2 points here, marginally better than smashing the wall. Kimi Antonelli is now just 2 points off of Lewis Hamilton, as Carlos Sainz's podium here moves him into the best of the rest position. And further down, Tsunoda and Lawson get ahead of Gasly. And in the Constructors' Championship, Verstappen's recent performances mean that Red Bull are fairly clear in P2, as Mercedes overtake Ferrari. The Singapore Grand Prix comes next, a race you absolutely expect to be the same in qualifying versus the real race, and it really doesn't disappoint here. The only different point scorer versus real life is Isaac Hadjar. However, whilst the top two remains the same, Piastri actually gets P3 here instead of getting hit out of the way by Lando Norris, meaning that Antonelli is P4 and Norris is down in P5. The rest of the point scorers are in a slightly different order, but as I said, the same people. All this means that the gap at the top in the Drivers' Championship is 20 points, Antonelli gets back ahead of Lewis Hamilton, and in the bottom half, Nico Hülkenberg has finally qualified P11 for a second time, taking him ahead of Jack Doohan. And in the Constructors' Championship, Mercedes re-overtake Red Bull, as McLaren are on the cusp of becoming our champions. The Circuit of the Americas brings us sprint race number 4 of the season. A race in real life that saw a clash between Nico Hülkenberg and the two McLarens, which saw both papaya cars out of the race. However, here they manage a P2 and a P3 behind Max Verstappen, who wins again. And Nico Hülkenberg gets P4 here, meaning that he's finally scored points in the qualifying only championship. At this stage in real life, he was on 37. And in the main race, we've got the exact same podium as real life. Verstappen wins again, Norris is P2, and Charles Leclerc comes home in P3. Further down, we've got Antonelli, Sainz, and Alonso all scoring where they didn't in real life. This all means that after 19 rounds in the season, there's just 1 point in it at the top between Oscar Piastri and Max Verstappen. Further down the order, we've got Lewis Hamilton getting back past Kimi Antonelli, and in the bottom half of the championship, Hülkenberg gets past Colapinto. Let's go. In the Constructors' Championship, as you might have expected at this point, McLaren have taken the Constructors' Championship. I mean, you weren't expecting that bit to be different, right? And in the rest of things, Red Bull get back past Mercedes and Ferrari have fallen back to P4. The Mexican Grand Prix sees an identical top two to what we had in real life, with Lando Norris taking home the win. However, in P3, we've got Lewis Hamilton getting a podium for Ferrari, a feat he didn't manage across the entirety of the 2025 season. However, he does here, and we love to see that. The other big change in the top 10 is Oliver Behrman, who was P4 in real life after profiting off of the Verstappen-Hamilton scrap. However, here he's down in P9. The only other really notable changes are that Russell is P4 here instead of P7, and Verstappen, who was on the podium in real life, is down in P5 here. And all this means that after 20 rounds of your qualifying championship, Max Verstappen has taken the lead. And in the rest of the Drivers' Championship, in the top half and the bottom half, it's all remained the same. And in the Constructors' Championship, Mercedes get back past Red Bull, and Williams have gotten ahead of VCarb. The penultimate sprint race of the season takes place at the Brazilian Grand Prix, where we've got the exact same 1-2 as we had in real life. Norris in P1, Antonelli in P2. However, in P3, we have Oscar Piastri, whose blushes are spared massively as he manages to not bin it here, picks up the podium. And in the main race, we once again have the same top two. However, in P3 is where we have massive changes. Charles Leclerc, who DNF'd in real life, gets P3 here, a big 15-point swing for him. And obviously Max Verstappen, who went from the pit lane to the podium in a beautiful drive, we miss out on that entirely here. He's still in the pit lane, guys. So Verstappen misses out on some juicy points here, and the rest of the point scorers are all the same drivers, just in slightly different positions. And the aftermath of all of that drama this weekend, Lando Norris takes over the lead in the Drivers' Championship for the first time since the Chinese sprint race. Max Verstappen drops to P3 and Oscar Piastri maintains P2. Kimi Antonelli gets back past Lewis Hamilton after his 2 P2 finishes this weekend, and in the bottom half, Liam Lawson is up to P11 and Behrman has gotten past Ocon. And in the Constructors' Championship, VCarb have gotten back past Williams and Haas have gotten ahead of Sauber. Round 22, the Las Vegas Grand Prix, and we've got an absolutely massive swing in the championship versus real life. Of course, here, in real life, McLaren got a double disqualification, which is what brought Max Verstappen back in with a hope of winning the championship this season. However, McLaren don't double disqualify here. Norris takes home the win, and that is a massive 25 points for him in the context of our championship here. Verstappen does still manage P2 here instead of his P1, but Carlos Sainz in P3, what a beast, his 3rd podium of the season. Max Verstappen is still just 2 points off of Oscar Piastri at this stage, so maybe we shouldn't write him off completely, but the entirety of the Drivers' Championship in the top half and the bottom half remain the same after the Vegas Grand Prix, and the Constructors' Championship as well. It all remains the same. The final sprint race of the season takes place at the Qatar Grand Prix, and in that sprint, we have the exact same top 3 in real life as we have in the qualifying only championship. And all the point scorers remained the same drivers, just in slightly different positions, notably Max Verstappen in P6 here instead of what he managed in real life, which was P4. But the main race does give us another big swing in the championship, and it's another big swing in favour of the McLaren team. With them botching the strategy in real life on that early safety car, they don't have the opportunity to do so here and get a 1-2 finish. Verstappen is P3 here instead of the win that he managed in real life. Carlos Sainz, who was on the podium in real life, is down in P7 here, and Isaac Hadjar picks up a P6 finish, whereas in real life, he DNF'd. So, after 23 main races and 6 sprint races, the gap at the top in the Drivers' Championship, in the qualifying championship, is just 6 points between Norris and Piastri. In real life, it was 18 points between Norris and Piastri. And between Norris and Verstappen was only 12 points in real life, but here is 23. So all that means that if Verstappen is to win the title in the qualifying championship, he needs to win with Norris below 9th and Piastri below 6th. And if Piastri is to win over Norris, he just needs to win in Abu Dhabi. Let's see what happens. In the bottom half of the championship, Tsunoda gets past Alex Albon, and in the Constructors' Championship, everything remains the same. On with the final round. And at the final round of the season, as we know, it was only last weekend, Max Verstappen does indeed take home the win and do exactly what he needed to do. However, Lando Norris picks up P2 and Oscar Piastri gets P3, Lando doing what he needed to take home the championship, and so wins the qualifying only championship as he did in real life. Well done, Lando. And in what was quite an underwhelming final race of the season, it's unsurprising to see that a lot of the top 10 is exactly as it was in real life. Hamilton does manage to get up to P8 in real life, but here obviously he qualified down in P16. And with all of that, here is our final standings in the qualifying only championship. Of course, Lando Norris still maintains the championship as he did in real life. However, Oscar Piastri is up into P2 over Max Verstappen. Kimi Antonelli gets ahead of Lewis Hamilton, and Carlos Sainz is best of the rest over Alex Albon. Albon, who in this championship only gets 37 points. And in the Constructors' Championship, the top 4 remains the same as it did in real life. However, Williams and VCarb are swapped round, and at the bottom half of things, Alpine get a lovely P8 finish versus real life. As I mentioned earlier, I've got loads of videos coming out for the end of the 2025 season, so make sure to get subscribed to the channel for that. But if you're looking for a video right now, I've done the exact same concept on the 2024 championship. You can check that out by clicking on the screen right now.